That was an fascinating conversation with Gail, who always has so many insights and really is able to tie the Arctic to our everyday lives. What happens in the Arctic absolutely does not stay in the Arctic. So, for viewers who have been enjoying this broadcast, you are now, stay tuned, because this is a panel that we are super excited about to have early on in the day. We know that the world has already begun to feel the terrible effects of a warming planet. And rising sea levels, devastating storms, vanishing biodiversity. This is just a preview of even worse impacts to come. And that sounds like something that could really encourage all of us to just become disassociated, to think that we can't do anything. But the reality is that the world is going to survive and humans will be on this planet. We just need to reduce the amount of suffering and create a future that is thriving and get ahead of it today. And so the fight for the climate, as we know, really is the fight for the next generation. And it's deeply important to young people, and they will inherit the consequences of the choices that we make. So this story isn't just about the doom and gloom. It's not just about the challenges. Around the world, we're seeing solutions. We're seeing collaboration. We're seeing young people getting excited, bringing to the forefront ideas and innovative solutions, and really an unrelenting drive, a refusal to disassociate, a refusal to just kind of give up and give in. We believe here at We Don't Have Time that it's crucial to listen and amplify youth voices. That's why I'm so excited about this panel that we're doing early in the broadcast. It's important to get this optimism going and get you all excited. You don't have to be here. It's hard to be in Davos. It's expensive to be in Davos. We're going to get into all of that. But you are engaged where you are, and we will give you examples and opportunities to tune in and work with us and to carry this message to real action. So I'm thrilled now to joining me on stage the Arctic Basecamp ambassadors. It's an inspiring group of young change makers from around the world who are leading the way for the climate fight for their generation and generations to come. And these youth ambassadors are part of the Arctic Basecamp, this youth ambassador program. And on stage with me, please join me in welcoming 4 representatives: Camilo. She is the executive director of Oya Institute. Welcome, Camila. We have Sofia Corradi, a PhD researcher from the Federal University of Minas Gerais. Please correct the pronunciation. Gerais. We have Storm Lewis, the youth ambassador from Arctic Basecamp, and Mayumi Sato, PhD student at the University of Cambridge. So, welcome, ladies. Really appreciate you all being here. Sofia, we're going to start with you. We've called this session Youth Voices for the Planet. So what does it mean to be a voice for the planet?
Yeah, I think that can resonate differently for each of us, but reflecting on that, I think that as youth, we boldly stand for the planet and speak out about the climate emergency we live in, especially here in Davos, when we face these systemic challenges represented by the world leaders here. So when we say that we can be voices of the planet, I think we break this colonial narrative that this is the current systems adopt that fail to justify our society control over nature. So from one side, we have that humans exist apart from nature, but we remember that we are a part of the nature, so that we are rescuing that traditional narratives. And I would just like to add a brief comment from an indigenous leader from Brazil, Ailton Krenak, which says that the rivers, those beings that always habitat the world in different shapes, those are the ones who suggest me that if there's a future, this future is ancestral because it was already here. So when we regain this kind of narratives, and I think that youth does that boldly, I think we say that we are the voice of the planet because we are part of it.
I love that. Thank you. This is what we need here in Davos. We really need intergenerational conversations. And unfortunately, there hasn't been enough of that. But thanks to Arctic Basecamp and this program, it's an opportunity to bring the youth voice to these high-level conversations and remind everyone what's really at stake. Your futures, right, ultimately? So, Camila, I'm going to come to you. You've been working with, and also the youth is what brings social media, because I see everybody walking around confused about what to do. We need your voices to help explain, including, I'm not that much older, but including geriatric millennials could use your expertise here. Now, as a social media creator, how do you use that technology to really communicate about the climate? Tell our audience about your project.
Awesome. So first of all, I just want to say thank you for the opportunity of being here. The Arctic Basecamp and WWF team has made possible for us, and working with content creators. So like, I wasn't thinking about doing content creation, to be honest, a few years ago, but I went to my first COP, and it was like COP26, right in the middle of the pandemic, and see rooms full of like power and those people talking about decisions that affect my life and people like me without us in the room.
Right.
That makes me really mad. And then when I come back to Brazil, I just realized that regular people don't follow those discussions. It's boring, it's difficult, it's technical, and it's not that they are not able to do it, but media has sold to them other things to consume. And who is the better people to say them other those selling them lifestyles? So when I start to the Creators Academy program, so we decide to go like all the Brazilian biomes are at risk right now. I've been here to being kind of bridge of the interconnectedness of the Arctic and the tropical forests, for example. And I invite them to the journey. As we are in this magic mountain, I invite the creators to see firsthand what is at stake if they don't act, if they don't say truth, if they are not committed to real information, if they are just like fighting for one more like, one more view, disregarding that the seriousness of this conversation, and they have power. Like, I was just showing them, when you have 3,000 likes, it's not like it's 3,000 people.
Right.
We don't make sense of like which room, and then some of them has millions of views and likes and for like shares. So content creation is a tool to educate people and get them engaged, but most than that, it's a tool to make them get out of the fear state. So we've been working on like literally psychological approaches to change fear to love. If we don't have an emotional connection with our land, we won't be able to fight for it.
So basically this idea of not feeling hopeless, right? Because it is, and I felt bad setting this segment up with the negatives, but the reality is that it's scary. So
to be honest, like hopelessness is a fair emotion, and we need to acknowledge what we cannot do is stay in hopelessness forever. So like if you feel sad, you can, but if you love, like I'm sad because isn't the ending? It's getting worse. It's destroying everything. But I love this so much that I find the energy to rebuild.
Exactly.
Like you in the sadness, you'll find strength to move forward. That's the message.
That's great. You feel hopelessness because you have love ultimately.
Yes.
And so how do we harness that love for real action? Okay, amazing. Mayumi, you have a lot of international experience. All of you, you're here. I mean, this is an incredible opportunity to be in a location where so few people get exposure. And you've seen the benefits of this cross-cultural cooperation and just bringing together different people and different cultures. So talk to us a little bit about your views on this one and in the climate space specifically.
Yeah, I think that's one aspect of our generation that radically differs from, at least me being from Japan, where, most people who live in Japan are Japanese, and my generation is quite different from my grandparents' generation in that we have so much exposure, not just from traveling, but also social media. Although we talk about misinformation and sort of the perils of what, AI and fake news and how it proliferates on the internet, it also allows us to connect to people from disparate geographies. I think one of the best things about being in the climate movement has been the ability to connect to people from Brazil and the US and being able to understand the different ways in which the climate crisis affects us at a local level. But then also being able to tie into connecting that many of the perpetrators behind the issues in our community are very much interrelated, interlinked, and they come from very much systemic issues, as you mentioned earlier, colonialism being one of them. And I think that that's been really enlightening for me to have that safe space where we can talk about this. It's not always a normalized discussion where I've lived in the past and even back home. In particular, I would say that we in Japan struggle a lot with gender equity. That's not really discussion. Being able to travel a lot and have these discussions around what gender equity looks like in the climate space has been really liberating for me, because it's not always a space that's welcoming back home. And I would say that that's been very transformative, and I think that's one of the benefits of having these cross-cultural experiences as well.
Amazing. Thank you for being so vulnerable and sharing that openly and honestly. That takes courage. We appreciate that a lot. So, Storm, I'm coming to you. You've done research on food sovereignty, and it's all connected, right? The Arctic is warming the planet. It's causing increased climate impacts. We're seeing natural disasters. We're seeing food insecurity. We're seeing water scarcity. So let's go deeper into the food portion of this. Tell us what food, make the connection between food and climate, and tell us a little bit about your research.
Yeah, so food for me has definitely been my entry point into climate action. So growing up, I grew up in Brooklyn, New York, and I had a strong affinity for gardening. So I would find my hands in the dirt. There was vermiculture in my elementary school yard, and that wasn't necessarily the norm. And I made the larger connection to health through my family's history of breast cancer and the role that diet plays in community health. And so that for me was what drove me to then pursue my studies in food sovereignty and food justice. So going to your point about the connection between the Arctic and food systems. So everybody eats, everybody has a stake in accessing culturally appropriate and nutritious foods. And so when you think about warming, it's happening on local levels. So what that looks like for me in Brooklyn, New York is the urban heat island effect and the flooding. And so, for instance, not many people know about the vast amount of gardens and farm spaces that are present in New York City. So in Brooklyn alone, there's over 200 green thumb gardens. And then there's also 80 different Black-led food outlets that are present and feeding people every day. And so then on a day-to-day experience, we feel there may not be the language or rhetoric around climate change for everybody, but they feel the impact. So many farmers are experiencing extreme flooding, especially in the city. They're experiencing extreme heat. And I remember for myself volunteering this last season during the farm at the Hattie Carthan Community Garden. There were moments where I was weeding and I got dizzy just bending down and standing up just from the extreme heat. Yeah. And so in that moment, I'm thankful for the scientific language to kind of make that connection. But I think many people are experiencing on a day-to-day these larger climate crisis and larger shifts in temperature in their day-to-day experiences. And so food sovereignty in particular, the way I view it is there are the root of food sovereignty is really increasing economic resilience so that individuals are not only just receiving whatever is available at the moment, but they have the autonomy over their entire food supply chain. So thinking about the ownership over the production of food, the distribution of food, and so the outlets, the markets, the transportation systems even. Brooklyn Packers is a great example of a Black-led food distribution system in New York City. And also the financial institutions, so Black Farmer Fund would be an amazing example as well of ownership over all parts of the supply chain so that when there is instability and political instability or environmental instability, there is a autonomy and community ownership over the systems in place.
Everybody is such an incredible spokesperson for today. It's unbelievable. Each of you are just really owning your space, and it's very impressive to see, and I'm glad Brooklyn has a representative like you. I'm also Bed-Stuy over here, so yes. Have to represent. All right, I'm going to switch up the order. but it won't seem like it because I'm going back to Sofia, but I am going to switch up the order, I swear. But it's because I want to go from food to environment, because this is where you've been doing your research. And we're here in Davos. We need to make these connections about how everything is interconnected. We see how the Arctic losing its ice, the planet warming is resulting in food insecurity, everything I was just mentioning. But what is it that you really want those that are here and those that are tuning in to take away about the environment, Sofia, based on your research? What do you want them to understand?
Yeah, I think that highlight this point of interconnectedness, because we cannot talk about food and just limit it to that. We cannot address water and just limit it to that. We have to understand that our systems are interconnected, especially here. We talk about losing permafrost and how that impacts the world circulation and the whole climate systems. So there is a term on the environmental system science that's called the feedback loop. So some actions they can amplify kind of feedbacks. Let's say when we have a warming planet and we use more air conditioning, actually this is emitting more greenhouse gases, and that amplifies global warming. So this is an example of positive and amplifying feedback, but there is also a negative loop. So understanding how these climate systems and cycles function, and that we here at Davos and world global leaders making decisions, that is not limited to their companies, their countries, but discussing as a global society. And I think really putting on the plan the real diplomacy and be really understand this interconnectedness of us as individuals and as a collective.
Yeah, because what is the point of business, bottom lines, if there's no environment to be operating in, right? It's like missing the plot. Talk about like missing the plot completely. Mayumi, I'm coming back to you. So we've talked about how much you've gained from being able to have exposure and to different cultures. Talk to us about the importance of intergenerational exchanges as well. So, having youth that represents countries around the world, is that hitting 2 in 1, would you say? We need more of that sort of intergenerational and intercultural exchange.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that one of the main misconceptions that might exist about young people is that, we might offer, youthful energy, but maybe we don't necessarily have experience. But kind of refuting that point, we do have experience. A lot of our experience are also lived because we are facing the climate crisis in a way that older generations have not experienced. And so I think that intergenerational collaboration is particularly important because not only do we have that lived experience, but we have these knowledge systems, and we kind of grew up with a generation that's very interconnected and is exposed to very progressive ideas and values. Not everyone, but at least probably the kind of spaces that we operate in, we hold very progressive values around equity and social justice. And so I think that having intergenerational collaboration is really important because we are trying to move the needle towards achieving justice. And yes, it's quite a difficult challenge, and we're constantly against a larger, hegemonic power, governments, corporations. But I think even if it's uncomfortable, that collaboration is necessary because we're there to kind of pursue greater environmental justice and change. And I think that it's a two-way learning street. So I think that, the older generation, definitely they can provide great mentorship for us. And I think I've had great mentorship, and I think we can all speak to specific people in our communities who really nurtured us and gave us the confidence to even speak on stages like this. But on the other hand, we can also provide that kind of progressive agenda and to kind of push that needle.
Very well said. Very well said. And it's what Gail and I were saying in the beginning about how it's important to have different spokespeople and to reach different audiences. You're going to resonate much more with those that look like you. That's actually just behavioral science 101. And so the fact that we have different representatives that can reach those audiences that are more comfortable and more familiar with their faces, youth from all over the world, representing communities from all over the world, that goes a long way. And that's something we haven't done enough of. So Kamila, I'm coming back to you because that's the communications challenge, right? We haven't created a global network of communicators to really reach audiences with the information that they need. We're working on it. I think we're getting there, but let's hear your thoughts on that. What are the challenges in communicating still?
I think the biggest challenge is today, to be honest, is the platforms. It's not the people. We'll be able to reach the people and talk to their hearts and minds. But when companies have so much interest at stake, they will do whatever they can to keep their business going, right? But in times of communication, I think two main challenges. One is personal beliefs. You cannot break a belief that someone has holding their entire life. Sometimes it's hard to face these things, and they are receiving misinformation every day in their phones. So they are leading to believe in those lies, right? So this is one thing. The second thing is sometimes people are afraid to speak of hard topics, especially online, because they are afraid of being canceled, of has their numbers drop, because the algorithms, they are made for us to do silly stuff that was selling, right? That works. If you do something silly or if you're too polarized, the platforms, the algorithms, they work for you. You need to be full against something or full for something. If you're not in a fighting mode, you're not gonna win the audience attention. So it makes really, really hard talk about topics that needs more time to produce and more time to make it right. But I believe we have initiatives so amazing like the Arctic Basecamp teaching people to do that, and we are doing partnerships. And I need to say that in Brazil we have over 13 million content creators. It's a lot of people talking with millions and millions of people every day. So if we reach their minds and hearts, I think we believe we can reach others too.
Okay, so we need to create vehicles that actually allow the communications to get out there and to fight the interests that are preventing that from happening ultimately, right?
We need to make the internet free as it was when
Right.
it was invented.
Right. And just create more vehicles that's why we're doing what we're doing, quite frankly. This is free. Anyone can tune in. There's no firewall. There's no restrictions. And yeah, absolutely. That will build so much equity in the world if there's just free access
Exactly.
to unfiltered information. Yeah. Okay, we hear you. That is a great priority to put forward to those that are talking about exactly this in just down the mountain and in that congressional center. So we hope you're listening. Okay, Storm, back to you. So is it that surprising then, based on what Kamila said, that people aren't getting the information that is relevant and useful for them, for their families, for their communities? Talk to us about what communities need to understand, what leaders need to understand about food systems that may not be, so prevalent.
Yeah, let me think and process.
Well, what do leaders need to understand? Let's start with that one.
Yeah. So what comes to mind first is a large part of my work in food sovereignty is understanding how capital is moved, to and from food systems. And so some of the work that I've done has been in the philanthropic sector. So working with organizations like the Arrow Foundation on the work that they do with regenerative agriculture and climate action has been really informative to understand how decision-making is being made in terms of funding sources for food communities. And so I think one of the disconnects is the kind of decision-making happening in silos. So there aren't as many opportunities to have direct community voices playing a key role in how funds are being allocated. And through my research, I interviewed and spoke with over 50 different Black-led organizations and food businesses operating in Brooklyn, New York, and a large challenge is around the funding piece. So I have farmers that I've worked with, and they've said, hey, there's, a farm that's operating 2 blocks down, and they just got funding for an irrigation system. Meanwhile, I've been working in this industry for not industry, but in the food systems for over 25 years, doing this work on the ground, on the front line. And I don't understand how that's happening. But the thing is, a lot of farmers, they're not necessarily trained specifically in acquiring funds or trained in grant application processes. Their calling and the work that they do is cultivating food systems, cultivating community, cultivating abundance in the production of food. And
it's not made easy for them at all. There's so much bureaucracy.
Yes.
Something necessary.
Use your microphone, please. Go ahead. Feel free to jump in.
I was just
because we do want to make
like,
this conversational.
Capacity building is something that is it's necessary. But when we go to spaces like COP, for example, we have a lot of countries blocking agreements because they say, "Oh, capacity building is too expensive. It's not in my mandate." So, like, I think Davos is a place for us to put capacity building as part of the process of each implementation project, because most of the implementation is viewed just like, oh, we're gonna do our part. It's go everything on mitigation, and the high-tech startups that is starting like trying. I saw slogans they say is like something like nature but better. There's nothing better than nature though. So how can we put investment in actually like training people, making them more autonomous and their own adaptability, right?
Yeah, and I'll add on to that too. So one of the strategies that I've seen being implemented in more progressive philanthropic efforts is cluster funding. So what that looks like is investing in a portfolio that has a common thread between the work that's being done, but specifically funding organizations where there are gaps amongst other organizations at the capacity level. So for instance, what that could look like is funding an organization that has a really strong communications effort like Arctic Basecamp or Climate Basecamp, and then also funding an organization that is doing the work on the ground. And then there's opportunities for connection across those different grantees so that they can help fill those gaps in capacity. So then there's learning opportunities that are that don't necessarily require separate funding, but all the different grantees within that portfolio can then benefit from the shared knowledge within the other grantees. So that's something I've seen be very effective.
Yeah, very cool. Talk to us now about, I'm going to throw this out to the panel, whoever wants to start with it. So who's receiving the funding, right? So your personal organizations, your friends' organizations, just organizations you're affiliated with in some capacity or you're just aware of that you would like to highlight. And what those needs are. This isn't like make a pitch for funding. We have a whole separate segment on that we're going to definitely, we try to link resources to needs. But what are some initiatives underway that you're excited about? Who wants to start? Go ahead.
I can start. So I would say 3 main things regarding funds. 1, money flows through relationship. So it's really hard if you don't have the connections to actually have the opportunity to pitch. Most of the grants are small grants. I'm not complaining about small grants. They have a purpose, but some of the objectives require real money to infrastructure adaptation, to actually save people's lives, right? So the thing is, small grants are nice, but we need real money on those open calls. I think this is the second thing. And the third part for me is when you look at like the hands that are receiving money, most of those hands is to our white, is to our global north, and is to our male. So if we not decentralize the money to women-led projects, to minority groups that are doing the work on the field, will be very hard, because we are talking about like it's like they don't have the capacity to receive a lot of money. But if they don't receive money, they won't be able to pay for training and become more knowledgeable about stuff. So I think that this is more.
Sure, it's a vicious cycle ultimately that we need to get out of.
Exactly.
All right, so let's talk about initiative. Sophia, let me go to you.
Coming from as a scientist, coming from academia, I was reflecting on that. How make those financial fluxes access research? Because a lot of real good actions are happening on the ground, but especially talking about the reality in Brazil, the research and science is not well funded. And really, now doing my PhD, I question myself if I want to continue in academia after I finish it, because there are not so good perspectives. And I think we need to fund science.
As somebody who had to make that decision after getting her PhD, and clearly am not an active researcher or professor at the moment, there's still a lot of opportunity for your expertise outside of academia. And actually, that's where you might be even best suited to translate some of that academic research. There's very few PhDs that would be in front of a camera in Davos right now. So don't be too deterred by not having a tenure track professorship role as an opportunity. There's many paths to take. Hopefully I'm an example of one. So, okay, Mayumi or Storm.
I can go.
I can go after you.
I think, Sophia, I totally resonate with that also. I think I'm coming closer to the end of my PhD. I have the same sentiments, so definitely not alone. I would say, going off of what Kamila said, I do think that a major barrier is also the bureaucratic requirements of having to be formalized. A lot of the organizing that happens by youth happens informally, and I think that makes it very difficult to tap into funds. But there are organizations like Youth Climate Justice Fund, which is youth-led, and that's come into full force in recent years because they're addressing the issues that face youth. They know that many people don't speak English, and they shouldn't have to get funding. They might not have a formal education, which sometimes is a barrier. I don't know, that doesn't necessarily have to be indicative of how well you can organize for a climate solution. And again, like what you were saying about all the bureaucracies and intricacies of paperwork, if you don't know how to do it and you have to learn it in spaces like these or have a good mentor, it's very difficult to tap into that. So organizations like Youth Climate Justice Fund are really trying to circumvent some of those challenges and connect to the communities on the ground. And I think they accept applications in multiple languages, which is really great. And I just want to say, I want to shout out the Nat Geo Explorer community I'm a part of, because they actually fund research, they fund storytellers, they fund photojournalists across a wide set of sectors and specialities, and they give you the money and the freedom to kind of manipulate how you want to use it. And I think that's very important, is to not have these systems that force you, M&E's systems that are very stringent on how you actually, use the funds, because, change is very fluid, and sometimes you have to kind of create the project as it goes. And I think that's something that's really great about having flexible organizations and grant-making funds as well.
And to follow up with you on that point, how much of the funding should dictate? So should it be linked to the funding that there needs to be some sort of collaboration, communication, action required, right? Should that be dictated by those that are providing the resources? Or is more flexibility being built in for the organization a better thing? Yeah. Curious your thoughts.
I mean, I know that, like in the Nat Geo case, they really, really stress collaboration, and they even provide grants to incentivize collaboration between explorers, and also with the community specifically, because I think with a lot of these grants, it gives kind of the award or grant to a single individual at times, and that kind of celebritizes that individual. But what that does is diminishes the hard work that's being done at the grassroots. And I think, so that's where the power of collaboration is very important, is that we're not really just centering ourselves, is that we're actually saying this is a community-led effort. And, obviously, maybe one person is writing the grant, but it's really a whole group behind me. And I think that's important.
Can I just
go ahead.
Build on that? So the organization, one of the philanthropies that fund my organization, they have 200 grantees, and one it calls Climate and Society Institute. They are based in Brazil, and the program they are running now is they mix the grantees. So if I have something that requires a solar energy project, they go to the green tea that has the solar energy project to come to
That's
me,
cool.
and we join a proposal so we can have more money together. And it's institutional money, so we decide how we can allocate the money. So like I think some philanthropy organizations, they are really focused and concerned proving to the families and the donors how the money are going, so they block a little bit the green tea's freedom. But if they trust, I think this is an exercise of trust that the green teas will do what's better for the money on the ground.
And just thinking through, if you don't require those receiving the funding to spend half their time sometimes on just communicating back to the funder what they're doing, it frees up a lot more. I can tell. We've all been there. Have we all been there? Okay. All right. Well, not to wallow in that commiseration for too long, but Storm, talk a little bit about the initiatives that you're excited about, some of the funding sources that you want to highlight. Share with us.
Yeah, definitely. And I just also want to be very specific to when it comes to funding that specifically I'll highlight the research report that my advisor from grad school, Dr. Dorcita Taylor, produced about funding in the environmental sector. And so specifically they interviewed and assessed many different reports. And so the big green organizations, individually, they receive more funding than all of the environmental justice organizations that they assessed within that report. So I would highly recommend looking at that on the Justice, Equity, Diversity, and Sustainability
Disappointed,
Initiative.
but not surprised.
Yeah, their page. So that's something to check out if you want to see a really clear breakdown of how funding is distributed and the disparities in that. And so in terms of exciting projects, I'd really want to highlight, again, like the Black Farmer Fund initiative. So they do work specifically in the Northeast region and they support Black farmers, and they offer programming such as patient capital, which is something that Black farmers have often been denied and discriminated against, specifically, especially within the U.S. context of the African-American experience and with slavery and everything preceding that. And there have been the USDA's role, or the United States Department of Agriculture's role in predatory lending and discriminatory practices for Black farmers that have led to major land losses is a really, really challenging issue that still impacts farmers today. And so less than 1% of New York State farmers identify as Black within reports from about like 2017 and so on. So Black Farmer Fund is filling a really important role in funding these initiatives and funding Black farmers to own their means of production.
And are they helping identify the funding from the federal government, from the USDA? Is that part of it?
So they have their own sources of funding, so they provide grants directly to farmers. So that they're filling the role, filling the role of the financial institutions. So in a sense, they're bridging that gap between federal funding. And I'm sure that they do provide general guidance for seeking other funds, because that's oftentimes like a supplemental resource, but they are providing the funding directly.
That's interesting. I'm mentioning that because of the history of predatory lending, there's so much distrust from Black farmers in the United States, even when administrations like Obama's administration really made an effort to course correct for that. It's still it wasn't taken advantage of because of that history. And so I think it's really great that there's organizations that are helping to navigate that history, to build that trust, and to actually allocate the funding that administration, forget about this current new administration going in, but the Biden administration, the Obama administration, their efforts to actually provide real, genuine funding for those that have been historically disenfranchised in the United States. So I think, for those interested, please look into that more. That's very fascinating. So let's build on this a little bit. We all represent different countries, different cultures. What are we still struggling with there? There's obviously a lot to overcome to really reach equity. Mayumi, you brought it up immediately when I asked the first question to you, in terms of how the youth has more awareness and acknowledgement of that. So let's get into that more. What is it that you want to express and share with those that are here, the leaders that are here, what would you want them to know and understand about exactly that, how we need to course correct for history?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think I would place Japan as one of these countries that have to really internally have a historical reckoning and look at, while we're talking about the impacts of colonization and the impacts of imperialism, even the U.S. centricity of how everything that the U.S. does has an impact on every other country. I think these are kind of discussions that we need to have, and especially coming from Japan, where there isn't much of this discussion of our own past, our colonial past, and that really breaks my heart, I think, and it kind of, our discussions around gender are also very much absent. And then when I look at how you might think that that's disconnected from decision making in the climate space, but it actually very much is connected. If you look at who's actually sitting in on the Ministry of Environment, who actually gets to make the decisions around, what goes into Japan's NDCs, whose voices are heard, it's very much kind of not really acknowledging the kind of social and gender consequences of climate change and how we should really be put at the forefront of building those solutions. I would just say to the leaders here that while there are 4 of us that have been very privileged to be in this space, there are so many people on the ground that are really doing the work as well. I think in the case of Japan, language is a massive barrier. Most Japanese people do not speak English, and I think that's a privilege that I very much have, and I can acknowledge that's why I'm also here. But I really think it's important that we do kind of look beyond the kind of information that's being presented in just English or what's just happening in the global north. We do look to what's happening on the ground. And I think if you listen to those narratives and their stories, I think we'll be able to have a bit more justice-oriented discussions around reparations, climate reparations, and stuff.
Yeah, great. No, thank you for sharing that. I want to ask each of you pretty much the same. Let's go down the line. Do you want to go ahead, Storm?
So could you rephrase the question?
Yeah, the idea is, as youth, you are much more advanced in acknowledging the history that has led us to the inequity that we're in currently. There's much more awareness in your generation of that, and much more just accepting that there's accountability that's needed rather than brushing it under the rug. So from your own personal experience and from the state you find yourself in, what is it that you want to say about that, and especially to the world leaders, to their ears, about how to make a future, because they're deciding on future right now, how to make it more fair, how to make it more equitable, how to correct for history, how to ensure that this doesn't repeat itself?
Yeah, so for me, I think I've often been fortunate to be in spaces with different executives or leaders in this field. But that's not enough. I think some of the most effective impact that I've had has been in my role serving on boards. And so thinking about how executive decision-making is being made, and oftentimes youth voices are not represented and reflected on those spaces. And so I'll highlight just Green Leadership Trust work, doing diversifying environmental boards. And also not just about putting your space or putting your name into these different rooms or being present, but also having the support system so that you're not feeling alone and not feeling siloed as a youth voice or representative, and creating support systems and outside of that. And so Green Leadership Trust does that in their retreat. So they have a community of environmental board members from diverse backgrounds that come together and can share in those experiences and really support one another as we're moving through these challenging spaces.
Excellent. Thank you. Sophia?
Yeah, what I was reflecting on, I think it's one of the major struggles in climate diplomacy nowadays, considering the common but differentiated responsibilities on greenhouse gases emissions, because mostly of global north is developed, let's say that, due to the historical pollution of their industries and all of that. And now even progressive governments in global south, they defend that they have the right to pollute, to develop and grow. And I think this is fair, but this is limited thought. and this relates to the systemic thinking we were just touching upon before. And I think, it's hard to put all the responsibility on the global south. You have to think differently. You have to develop in a different way. So how all those countries should collaborate, and there's a discussion also touches the financial topic. How can global north finance global south under that? And I think that's how historical development touches our current struggles in the climate diplomacy. Yeah.
That raises me a question. What is development, right? This is the right question to make, because what we call development is just a economic system that is broke from the beginning, and no one is raising a flag radical enough to rethink everything. Everyone is talking about let's rebuild from inside. Let's make incremental changes, but we don't need incremental changes anymore. We need radical changes now. And what we call development. I don't know how to translate in English this, because it's a very wise guy in Brazil. We call him Nego Bispo, but he says that we don't need development, we need involvement. We need people engaged from inside, committed to, from the guts, they need to be committed. What I feel is that most of people look at us as you were too naive. I was talking with a CEO a few years ago, and he was like, when I was your age, I was thinking the same. And then, what is happening to you? And then he laughed and say, shareholders. So the thing is, the issue is with the shareholders. If they not believe that the money will flow better, if they don't believe that they could do better, that the results is worthy, they won't change where the money goes. That's the issue, how many board meetings, really billionaire board meetings we had a chance to go. I just learned that if you buy some stock, you can actually go to a meeting of shareholders and speak there. So that's my next step, because if you have a stock, you can speak. Sometimes we need to buy our power. It's like this, but Davos gives us a perspective that is very different. Gail said to us that every conversation matters, and this is important. Support systems make all the difference. I want to highlight a organization that is U.S.-based organization, but they are awesome. It's called Taproot Earth. They has been for years getting together Black folks seeking for liberation and now climate reparations. And we are getting a very serious discussion in March around climate reparations back into the church time, because colonization was something that was supplied by the church. When your faith dictates something, it means everything. And unfortunately, our world still works more on faith and beliefs than numbers, data, and science, right? So we need to change what people are believing now. And Taproot does that in a very beautiful way. They have been creating spaces where Black folks can be free, can be happy. And it's really, really hard, because when we are in places like this, most of the time we are trying to prove ourselves at best, all the time, to, proving that I'm worthy to be here. I know I am now, but until I get here, it's so hard. And how can I open spaces for more people like me? That I think we are compromised, right? We are committed to open doors for more people, but open doors sometimes requires us stay silent when something we want to confront, but it's maybe it's not the time, maybe it's not the language. So I'm trying to learn how to balance
And any minority representation will feel like that. Women, just broadly, right? Every event I came to, I had the exact same thought until you turn 40, and then you just don't care what people think. Or I think for you all, it's going to be earlier than that, and I hope it just gets earlier and earlier and earlier. Because you start to feel you belong somewhere, and that's powerful. And then it's exponential. And if you can fake that, I highly encourage you to, because it really is the truth. The fake it till you make it. And eventually that's who you are. Okay, so have any of you on this panel heard of what happened with ExxonMobil and how shares were bought? Enough shares were bought of ExxonMobil. This was like 5 years ago, maybe a little bit more now. And they were able to put a activist on the board of directors as an independent director. So that was exactly that plan and logic that went into effect. And there is a independent director who represents environmental interest on the board of ExxonMobil. So there are moves like that. It's expensive, obviously, and it's counterintuitive, because you're becoming a shareholder, and then you want to blow. Technically, you're looking to kind of Trojan horse or even blow up its revenue model. So it takes a lot of power, a lot of courage, a lot of resources to do it, but it is what's needed. And there needs to be a spotlight on the independent directors. Who are those people, right? Because the CEOs get all the flack, but the CEOs can be replaced. Why not target the board as well? Because the board represents the shareholders. So as incredibly smart youth leaders, and those that are tuning in, just putting the strategy out there.
Yeah.
Okay, so we're coming to the close of this session. I do want to ask all of you to just reflect your final words. What is it that as youth you would like to say to the youth? And those that are tuning in, to just really stay hopeful, to stay, to emphasize that that hopelessness comes from that fear of losing those you love, losing the environment that you love, losing a culture you love, losing a history. But how do we really turn that into action? How have each of you done it? And using your personal story and journey as a motivator for those that are kind of on the, that want to do something but are feeling hopeless. So let's go to, I want to throw this around. Storm, let's start with Storm.
Okay, I want to start by expressing gratitude for Arctic Basecamp and for the WWF UK team for, giving us this platform to be here. And then I think the message I want to end with is a message of abundance. Oftentimes, it's easy to fall into a scarcity mindset, as though there's nothing more to pull from. But I think when you're operating from a stance of abundance and from a place of there's more to do, more to work towards, more like love, as was mentioned, to share and give out, like that's what keeps me going and keeps me motivated.
Go ahead, Mayumi. Sofia, go ahead.
Yeah, I'm also very thankful, and I think on messages for other youth, I've heard once, and I try to adopt that. I heard that activism is a place for imagination. So that's why I see the world I want to live in, and then I act upon that. So me coming from academia and from the science field, I could develop as much research I wanted and publish many articles, but most of the people wouldn't read that. So that's why I challenged myself to be in these places. At first, I thought I didn't belong, but here am I again, and I'm very happy to be sharing that with such an amazing people. So yeah, I would say imagine the world you want to live in and act upon that.
I love that. Let's go to Mayumi.
I would say in terms of a message of hope, I think, when you earlier said it's okay to feel hopeless sometimes, and I totally agree with that. But then at the same notion, I think that I don't also want to have this defeatist attitude all the time. And I think for other young people, I would just say it's always really important to remind yourself that we are in a position to be here because of the work that older generations did to pave the way for us to be in this space and to challenge, the issues of our time. And so, if you look back at history, young people have always been at the forefront of social change, whether that's protesting South African apartheid or protesting Vietnam War. And so I think it's important to continue that legacy, and that requires hope. It's always an inevitable negotiation process, and we're always going to feel uncomfortable and have plentiful amounts of barriers and powerful interests that are working against us. But we just have to continue the work that's been going on for centuries, actually.
They say almost everything, I think. I think you need to find love inside of you for anything, any reason. And yesterday we had our circle of hope right here. We were like around fire, as there were like for thousands of years, people reunite around fire to get their things done, right? And we were there building hope into ourselves. And I believe like if you can find your circle, sometimes hope can come from like seeing a flower just blooming, Hope can come when snow come from the sky, and because that global warming is making this difficult. We have less snow than we expected here in the West, and should be here in this magic mountain. So I think look to nature. They will give you all the hope you need to continue. And if you had inside of you the desire to continue to live, is your duty to fight. Is our duty fight for our freedom. But it's also our duty to live and be happy. So I invite anyone, especially youth, to put your hopelessness in a place of fight and go to your buddies, and when things get really, really bad, ask for a hug. Will be not just oxytocin in your brain, but it will build up from inside. I really think hugs can save lives, and this is my recipe for continue to go.
Would you ever give Donald Trump a hug?
You know what? If he is able to stay 20 seconds in my hug, I can do it. Because probably he is so uncomfortable with himself, he's not staying 20 seconds in a hug. But if he stays, I'll be able to talk to him if he stays 20 seconds in a hug.
I hope that reaches him on his inauguration day. That's amazing. So this just goes to show this is such a two-way mentorship, right? The youth having the mentor programs, being able to get exposure to these types of events, and then you're mentoring in return. Everything that was said on this panel is so inspiring, and will hopefully reach some of those negotiators down this magic mountain, as you call it, and they will receive the mentoring they need from the next generation, because they need it. Okay, well, thank you so much. This was really brilliant. And thank you for those of you tuning in. We don't have time, our group and Arctic Basecamp are big fans of what you're all doing. We wish you the best of luck going forward. We will continue to give you a platform, because as we said right in the beginning, that communication challenge, we need to overcome it. We need to make information equitable around the world. So for the audience here in Davos, for those that are tuning in online, thank you for watching. Conversations like this, as you know, are essential for spreading awareness and just showcases how many voices there are in this climate movement. It is not homogenous by any means. We can see the diversity here, and there's so many more that are lending their voices to speaking up about really necessary climate action that needs to be taken. So this concludes our first day of broadcasting from Davos during the 2025 World Economic Forum. We'll be back tomorrow with a fantastic lineup of interviews and conversations that you will not want to miss. If you enjoyed this conversation, then why not join us and give us your own perspective? You can do that by going to wedon'thavetime.org and signing up. So please engage with us, and we will see you tomorrow. Nicely done.